Hello, everyone, and welcome to Health and Happiness at Work. This podcast is for busy working adults trying to figure out how to better take care of themselves and others. My name is Katy, and I will be your host. We are here today because adulting is hard and because busy working adults spend more time at work than anywhere else. We're going to have real conversations about real life and, most importantly, swing into action on the biggest opportunities. We're going to talk about ways to layer health, fitness, and wellness directly into your workday so that you feel fantastic. I cannot wait to dive deeper into each of these topics related to health and happiness. You are not alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Health and Happiness at Work. I am here today with a special guest, Dr. Natalie Candela. Welcome, Dr. Natalie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we are going to talk today about rethinking perfectionism based on some, I'll say, informal research of my social network. It seems like I am not alone in becoming a reformed perfectionist. So I thought this might be a hot topic or one worthy exploring. But before we get into that, I always like to give a little context, a little backstory. One of my favorite things to do is to storytell and to let folks know how I met someone or how we got here today. This would have been many months ago, many months ago. I mean, maybe within the last 10 months, I started reading quite a bit about hypnosis. And that led me to our friend Google. And Google led me to our friend Dr. Natalie Candela. And I was reading through her website and testimonials and that type of thing. And I just quickly discovered this is really interesting to me. And everything that I had read showed that it was only helpful and not harmful. And so if it falls into that category of this won't hurt and it might help.
Yeah, why not try it?
Why not give it a go? And I am fairly vulnerable on this podcast. I tell people all kinds of things that I've been working through that inform my career or my work or my day-to-day or what I write about or what I choose to explore on this podcast. And so one of the reasons I reached out on Google through the website to Dr. Natalie was because I'd not only done this reading, but I was actually also navigating something from a healthcare perspective that was bothering me. I thought maybe it came from grieving. I thought maybe it came from stress. I thought maybe this ailment, I'll call it, came from something I couldn't even remember. And I thought maybe that's something that we could explore. And so I reached out through the website and I said, hey, I've been diagnosed with something called tic disorder. I have these movements that I do with my head and neck. I feel really irritated at times. I've always had anxiety that I've been working on for quite some time now. But the tic was new and it made me very self-conscious, especially on video. And Lord knows we've been on video more than ever. So here I am watching it and feeling self-conscious. And I thought, this is something that maybe we could explore and figure out what is it that's really bothering me and maybe get to the root of something. And that led me to scheduling that first appointment. And then I went for the first appointment and we spent some time talking, getting to know one another, did intake as you typically do when you go for a first session. And so that's kind of how I got to my very first hypnosis appointment. And I'll tell you more about that. But I want to pause there and I want to give Natalie a chance to talk about what led her to hypnosis and anything you're willing to share about your background and professional highlights. I'll kind of hand it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been a hypnotherapist now for, I think, about 6 years, or actually 7. For most of my career, I was in the field of education, and I thought that I would spend the rest of my life there. I never really intended to switch. I never saw myself in anything else. And then I think it was 2015 when something shifted in me very unexpectedly. I wasn't really sure what happened, but within a matter of, I would say, a week, maybe two at the most, I felt that I lost all passion for what I was doing, for the job that I held. And this was nothing really happened outwardly, nothing happened externally to cause that, but internally something told me this was the end and it was time to move in a new direction and that I was supposed to find a new direction. Now, this was utterly heartbreaking because I didn't know what was happening and I didn't know why I lost passion and I didn't know where I was supposed to go and I didn't know what was going to happen with the rest of my life. But that prompted me to start searching. And so that search led me to hypnosis, hypnotherapy. More specifically, I was interested in the spiritual aspect of this work because I wanted to help people gain a greater view of their soul journey. And so I wanted to do regressions, past life regressions that would help people understand purpose of their current life, where they're coming from, where they're going. But hypnosis was the road that I had to take to get there. And so it took me probably about a year to make that shift. It took me about 5 years to really get comfortable with the idea that I was walking a different path, completely different from what I walked before. But the main, I think, challenge for me was that I had an intuitive knowing that I was a teacher when I was 7 years old. It was a knowing that I now realize was my sole remembrance of what my purpose was and what I was supposed to do. And so that made sense when I was in education, even though I wasn't always like a teacher standing in front of a class of students, but I was always in the field of education. So being a teacher kind of made sense there. When I switched to hypnotherapy, it stopped making sense. And so I had to discover meaning in that until after about 5 years, I finally made peace, I should say, with the idea that I was now a different kind of teacher, that I was a spiritual teacher, and that I did coaching that was becoming more and more part of my hypnotherapy practice. And through that, I was still teaching, even though, I wasn't doing it in a traditional format. People didn't come to me to take classes or to learn how to live, but the skills that I had and the knowledge that I had was a form of teaching, a form of helping people learn more about themselves, more about true nature of reality. And so I was still continuing with my purpose, just in a different way. So that took quite a bit of time to kind of come to peace with.
Well, thank you for giving everyone some context of what brought you to hypnosis, what brought me to you. And I think I was kind of surprised when I sat down for the first session and we spent a lot of time talking and exploring and asking and answering questions and that's really continued. Really every time I go for a session, we spend a fair amount of time in this place of coaching and I find that incredibly helpful. And then my experience of hypnosis is that we take the learning from the day and it becomes more of an embodied experience for me because I get into a state of deep relaxation. I feel completely at peace. And we're then revisiting and visualizing and what to me feels like embodying, that's just my experience, the learning. And I've had a phenomenal experience. So I don't want to oversell it so much that somebody else goes and they're like, oh, wow, Katy really hyped it up. But I have had a really wonderful experience. And what's been interesting is we have explored so many different beliefs, thoughts, experiences, situations, conflicts I've had to work through, aha moments. It's really gone a lot of different directions and I've appreciated that flexibility. And at the end of the day, fast forward, maybe 6 months, and I have been able to report improvement with what initially brought me in terms of feelings of irritation, agitation, the tic disorder, etc. And that's a whole nother topic, but I'm grateful for that relief and that discovery, and that really just gets us to today. So I thought we could kind of kick off with a little bit of basic education around hypnosis. It's been interesting as I tell people about my journey. People are fascinated and there's lots of questions. And to be candid, and you can address this too, Natalie, in my line of work in healthcare, there's a lot of thoughts about, is that a best practice and is that evidence based, et cetera, et cetera. And I just went into it with an open mind and I thought, if this helps me, that's all that matters. And it absolutely did. So we're not here to focus exclusively on hypnosis, but we're going to get to some topics that I have explored in hypnosis and that takes us on this journey today. So before we get into that discussion, what would you want the world to know about hypnosis and your experience of it as a practitioner and the people that you've been able to work with over the years?
Yeah, so what you said about the session is that we always discuss something at a conscious level. We have a conversation, and sometimes this conversation sort of goes from one thing to another, and we may be addressing completely different topics from session to session. But at the end, we do hypnosis that deepens whatever we discuss in that session. And so the reason for that is based on the understanding of what hypnosis does and why we use it. So hypnosis allows us to go past the conscious mind and make changes in the subconscious thinking. But the thing that many people don't understand is that conscious mind is still present. In hypnosis, you don't fall asleep. If you fall asleep, I have to wake you up because then you're unconscious. So hypnosis allows us to make changes on a subconscious level, but why do we want to make them? When a client comes in, they usually know what they want to happen consciously, right? Let's say you want to be at peace. You want to feel peaceful during the day, right? And so that's a conscious knowing. But something within you is pushing you towards a different state of mind. So that something often is some subconscious belief, some subconscious judgment, or subconscious setting. So when we talk consciously first, we figure out what you want to create. We figure out possibly what's behind it. What is holding you back from feeling peaceful, right? And then when we go into the hypnosis state, then I work with the subconscious part and I help it to align with your conscious thinking. So whether I need to change its perceptions, whether I need to change subconscious beliefs, I do it within that state. Because at the end of the session, we want to bring your conscious thinking in alignment with your subconscious thinking so that then the changes that you want to create are much easier to create and they're possible, where before you were in an internal conflict. Part of you wanted to go left and part of you wanted to go right. Now they're in alignment. So that's why there's always conversation at the beginning. And then in hypnosis, we deepen and we strengthen and we reinforce the learning that you got out of the session or the aha moments that you got out of the sessions. But the thing that I think I always face is the misunderstanding that hypnosis is either some sort of a magical trick that I perform, that I sort of can snap my fingers or, I don't know, knock somebody out and just do things to them and they come out a different person. And that is not accurate. The client is always in control. And a hypnotherapist, at least the way I practice, is I offer suggestions and I always give the client the freedom and the space to not accept those suggestions if they are not in agreement with them. So I don't force change on anyone. In hypnosis, people are always conscious and aware. They're just in a very relaxed state, which means that their conscious mind is kind of resting and relaxing, but it's still present, right? And you can probably speak to that.
I'm giggling because if you knew how anxious I was for decades and how much progress I've made and how much I enjoy the peace and the relaxation that I experience, you'd be a raving fan too. I wish somebody could kind of step into my body and my brain. And so, like you said, it's an incredibly relaxed state. I feel safe. I feel that I can relax. I feel in control. 10 out of 10 times she'll start to bring me out of hypnosis and I'll smile and I say, but I don't want to. I want to stay here.
Right.
But I'm conscious. I'm aware. I know what's happening.
You don't fall asleep during the session, right?
No. I very much look forward to it as dedicated self-care time for me to slow down and for my body and brain to rest and to do this work. That's how it feels for me. And I anticipate that people come to you for a whole host of reasons. I don't even know if it's fair to have you summarize that in a sentence or two. Are there any themes you see?
Yeah, first of all, hypnosis can be used for a whole host of reasons. But I do see patterns, but I think patterns depend on the practitioner because we actually subconsciously attract, based on our own issues, we attract certain types of clients. So the clients that seem to gravitate to me are dealing with self-worth, with parental issues, like there's, issues at home in their childhood, sometimes abuse. And, as a hypnotherapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. So I cannot offer therapy, psychological therapy for psychological conditions. I can help people change behaviors and improve kind of their well-being. So the conditions or the issues that I'm bringing up, it's not that they come in to me with a diagnosed sort of psychological condition and I take to treat it, but the people that come to me often have those issues in their past. So they're dealing with echoes or consequences of those things in their past.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, there were a few different directions we went in our coaching and discussion, and it was very organic. One thing might kind of show up, and so we explore that a little bit. And I don't know exactly where we started on the day that this came up, but Natalie and I got into a discussion around perfectionism. And I shared a few different thoughts on it. And I said, sometimes it wears me out. It's like exhausting being this way and expecting things to be perfect, look perfect, be good enough. And it really wears on me. And I also mentioned to Natalie, I said, in some ways, I have seen this in myself and I've actually seen it as a strength because, to use work as an example, when I produce something for my business, I produce something for clients, I touch it a lot of times in the spirit of continuous improvement. And we're going to have a standard of excellence and we're going to make this as perfect or aesthetic or correct or accurate as possible. And I have had some feedback from my team members in the past that, okay, Katy, it's a bit much. To which I say, but I produce really high quality work, So I think having certain expectations or standards or this mindset of continuous improvement, in some ways, it can serve someone well and it can produce something that you feel good and proud about. I think what we look at in health and wellness is, when does a strength or a way of being or a state tip from being healthy and productive and supportive to then working against you? And wearing on you? When is it too much of a good thing, if it's a good thing? When is it unhealthy? And I think you would agree that any behavior can tip to the unhealthy side of things. If I think about nutrition, like it's wonderful to choose healthy foods and eat balanced and to give your body the nutrition that it needs. But there is that tipping point that it can become obsessive and people can restrict what they're eating and they can have an unhealthy relationship with food. So we have to strike that. I don't love the word balance, but we have to find that
alignment.
I like that word.
With health.
We have to find at what point does something tip from being healthy to unhealthy, and then knowing, having that awareness in that moment of, ooh, this is a slippery slope. I want to keep this in the realm of healthy. So anyways, we started talking about perfectionism, and Natalie said to me, what does it mean to you to be perfect? And I'm not often quiet, but I paused and I really did think about it, and I gave some answers and some examples. So maybe we start there. What would you offer up, Natalie, when, like me, someone's in your chair saying, but I want to be perfect. This needs to be perfect. That needs to be perfect. How do you challenge them?
Well, I asked them a question, but the reason and I'll tell you what question I ask, but I guess I should tell you what I'm hearing when they say that. And what I'm hearing is that there is a lot of judgment behind their desire to perform to a certain level. And it's a judgment that they have internalized that is now coming from them, seemingly, because they are the ones deciding that they want to perform to a certain level. But I want to understand, and I want them to become aware of, before they internalized it, it came from somewhere else, from an external source. I do believe that we have so much judgment in our world, and our perception of reality is dependent on judgment, on constant judgment. Now, we call it different words: evaluation, assessment, perception, but it's all different levels of judgment. You know, when we look at someone, we have to judge perhaps what race they are, what gender, what age group. We make judgments, value judgment or perception judgments, all the time. We judge whether it's daytime or nighttime. We judge whether it's too early to get up or it's too late. I mean, we're constantly in the process of evaluating reality and judging it. And some of the things, you know, people would say, well, these are necessary. I mean, we need to know if it's too early to get up or we can still stay in bed. And of course, there are perfectly natural, normal sort of assessments of our experience that we have to do on a regular basis. But, you know, as you were saying before, there are things that are in alignment and then, or in balance, and then we kind of tip out of that balance, right? So there are a lot of judgments that are out of balance, that are perfectly subjective, and that were sort of created and given to us for specific purposes, for a purpose of maybe subjugating some people or selling certain things. So, for example, judgments around beauty, or, you know, what's acceptable and what's not, what is beautiful and what is not. A lot of it, first of all, is extremely subjective, because if you go from culture to culture, then ideas about beauty are sometimes completely opposite, right? So there is not really an objective idea necessarily of beauty. But also, a lot of our ideas of beauty are tied to the work of the cosmetics industry. So they are, in fact, selling to us the idea of what is beautiful. And then if we internalize that, then we begin to work towards meeting that goal or that objective. So what I want to do when I talk to a client and the client says, well, I need to do it a certain way, I want to know what is their criteria for judgment? Do they even know that they're in the process of self-judging? And do they know where those beliefs come from? That, I mean, at this point, they're clearly internalized, but do they know that they could actually step out of them and refuse to go along with them? And so that's why I begin to ask questions that begin to kind of chip away at their perception of what's normal and what's real. Well, what is your idea of what's perfect? And where did you get that idea? And what would happen if you don't follow that idea? And, things like that. They're just simple questions that begin to kind of unpack the person's beliefs.
Mm-hmm. And I remember doing it that day, and all I could keep thinking as we're sitting here is like, man, if my mom's listening to this, she's probably going to say, Katie had a great childhood, and I did.
And it's not, I'm glad you brought it up. It's not a judgment. We're not adding a judgment on top of judgments. It's simply a matter of creating awareness. Because all of us, every single one of us, had a childhood that had some positives and negatives in it. It's not to place a judgment on any experience of growing up and any parental experience. It is simply to say, well, here you are right now. And if you understand, it's not even about figuring out necessarily so much what was happening in the past. It's understanding where you are in the present. Is that in alignment with what you want to create? And it's more about kind of understanding, this is where the spiritual kind of, I call it spiritual ideas because I look at reality a certain way, but some people would just say, well, it's just about, the facts of life. And the facts are that a lot of our beliefs are based on just on our personal perceptions, and a lot of our personal perceptions are influenced by external beliefs and perceptions. And so it's sort of beginning to untangle this knot of ideas or knot of kind of experiences, and understanding that you are the way you are today in this moment because of your parents, because of societal sort of directives, and because of just everything that is around you that you accept or you don't accept. And most of the things we accept. So it's just about creating an awareness and then deciding, okay, where do you want to go from here? It is not at all about figuring out, who was to blame to bring you here, because that doesn't help at all.
Sure. And like you mentioned, it's not like one thing happened to someone. Like, we are a product of so many different variables and influences, experiences, and thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And I do think sometimes as people, we get hung up on why. Like, why am I this way? Where does this come from? But maybe a better question for us to ask and to explore is, how do I enjoy a different experience? How do I feel more free to create, explore, be? There are a lot of boxes I think we put ourselves in. And that kind of leads to a conversation you and I were having ahead of the podcast, actually, where I was asking you, how often do you see perfectionism? I see it quite a bit because I think in my line of work, I'm coming into the workday. I'm meeting a lot of people who are high performing, high achieving. They're striving for certain professional goals. And I see how hard people are on themselves. So can you speak about that a little bit? Do you see the same thing, that people are very hard on themselves for the way they are and putting this pressure and maybe having this experience of, is this good enough?
Yeah, I think it's extremely common, but it shows up in different ways, and people don't necessarily identify it as perfectionism. But the judgment, the self-judgment is extremely common. It's just kind of planetary epidemic, I would say. We are so, not everybody, but the majority of us are very self-critical and self-judgmental. And again, that is part of the process for me, is to help people understand that just because we have this sense of sort of looming judgment over our heads all the time, that it's a construct that's created. We don't have to feel this way. We don't have to feel like we have to live up to some sort of an expectation, because every time we have a judgment, the belief behind it is that there is some sort of an objective yardstick, and you and I probably talked about it, that there is some sort of an objective, agreed upon measure of perfection, agreed upon measure of this is good, this is not, sort of a black and white kind of, everybody has to be this way. And Katy, you didn't live up to it, so there you go, feel bad about yourself. And part of my work is to help people understand there isn't anything like that out there in reality. Now, I mean, of course, there could be somebody's parents might impose their judgment. If you go to college, you're success. If you don't, you're a failure. Or if you weigh 120 pounds, you're a success. If you weigh 135, you're a failure. So, but again, those are beliefs and ideas that they themselves internalized, and they came from something. So when we understand that we swim in a sea of judgments about everything, then it makes sense that we experience this self-judgment about everything, starting from our appearance to our careers, to every role we carry, whether we're a good mother, a good father, a good son, daughter, a good parent. There is like judgment about everything. So people may not call it perfectionism in every situation. Usually I think we apply perfectionism more to maybe work, or it's more applicable within that, but it really pops up everywhere in different ways. I have a client who's always trying to please everyone within her family, so she doesn't allow herself to make decisions about anything, the simplest things. She always defers to others. Well, you wouldn't call it perfectionism, but it's within the same family, I would say, because it's this idea that if I make a decision and perhaps it's wrong, whatever wrong, I'm putting quotation marks around it, whatever wrong means, then I won't be accepted, I won't be loved, I won't be good enough, right? So there's always this evaluation, this judgment behind every decision. So it happens in every area of our life, but if you look at more career field, that's where maybe what we traditionally call perfectionism, it's about sort of the quality of something that we produce, the quality of something that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember thinking through that with you, and we looked at different objects, like what makes an antique perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
remember that conversation?
Yeah.
Because long story short, it came up because I love antiques and I love older architecture and that type of thing. And so we were talking about what makes this perfect, what makes that perfect. And that's the fascinating thing, is it depends on what you're speaking about, how you even picture it. An antique, you wouldn't expect an antique to be flawless because it's
Right.
old.
Right.
What makes it special is that it's unique and it's old and it's rare and it has character. And so we can say that the antique is perfect because that's what you would hope for, in an antique. So I remember we had some fun conversations like that. Like, you have to look at each situation.
Yeah, because I wanted to break down this idea of what perfect means.
Mm-hmm.
Because we think perfect is new and shiny, pretty, lovable. I was just yesterday on Facebook, and a thing popped up about people who did plastic surgeries, and like 20 people who basically had botched up plastic surgeries. And so this kind of is in line with this conversation of perfection, because they were doing them. Now, these are people that did like maybe over 100 surgeries to perfect themselves,
Oh,
right?
wow.
But the reason they started in the first place was because they felt they were not good enough. So, what makes it good? What makes you good enough? Who decides what is good enough, right? If you look at them now after all those surgeries, to me, they look deformed and in some cases quite unattractive, what I would consider attractive or not unattractive. But they kept going in search of that perfection. And so with my clients, I want to break down what they consider perfect. What does that mean to you? Because ultimately, it's a completely subjective experience. There is no universal yardstick
I
that measures
remember,
everyone.
I remember that being a helpful conversation. And then we also talked about function. I think we were talking about a house and like the walls of a house and what makes it perfect. And it's like, well, does it work? Does it function? Does it shelter you? Does it hold up the rest of the roof? And you were helping me to think through different scenarios and how trying to think of a way to summarize it, but just to think about how quick we are to label or assume, or in my case, I have a lot of black and white thinking. Like, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And so I think for years and years and years I've been breaking that down. And I think it's been really helpful to have these conversations about, you know, perfect doesn't mean flawless. In some situations, something can be perfect because it works. It's functional. Your walls are holding up your roof. It's perfect enough.
Yeah, but it's also who decides.
Mhm.
It's like you say, who died and made you, whatever, the decision maker on perfection.
Correct.
Like who decided? Did you decide that this way is perfect, or did you absorb it from somewhere else and now you're just perpetuating that idea that this is like the black and white thinking that this is black, this is white. Now, if you decided for yourself, that's okay. Everybody has the right to experience life as they wish. But before you experience it, be clear that you are the one deciding it and that it hasn't been sort of implanted into you in your childhood. And now when I say implanted, that's a loaded word. But when we are children, before we develop our conscious thinking, which happens around maybe middle school, we're basically walking around in a state of trance because we don't have conscious filter developed yet. And so when we are in a state of trance, which is what happens when you go into hypnosis, when you're in a state of trance, you just absorb suggestions, you absorb ideas without filtering through them, without evaluating them. So, in a sense, you can say that children are constantly hypnotized. They're in a constant state of hypnosis. That's why they're able to learn a whole language without really thinking too much about it. They just absorb it. So they are in a state of trance where conscious mind does not jump in. And when a thought is presented to them, for example, if a girl wears a dress, it's pretty. If she wears jeans, boys won't like you. I'm just taking an idea from the 50s, let's say. And if that is presented, there is no conscious mind to jump in and question that idea. A child will just take it in and drink it in and absorb it, and it will become their internalized way of thinking. So it's kind of ironic that, a hypnotherapist puts people into a state of hypnosis. But what we're trying to do is actually wake you up from, the hypnosis of your previous years. And that's one reason why I called my practice awakened hypnosis, because even though I'm putting you into hypnosis, into a trance, I want to actually awaken you. And I want you to understand that your ideas, well, anyone's ideas about what perfect means, did not originate from you. They came from a bunch of different sources. You have absorbed them, you live by them, you have accepted them. And now you find yourself at a point of conflict, internal conflict, that doesn't work for me anymore because I'm stressed out. So now, if you didn't come to me and you said, I'm perfectly happy, then I wouldn't impose my, you know,
Sure.
unpacking on you. But
Sure.
being that you came and you said, I'm not happy, then that's why I step in and say, okay, well, let's think. Why, do you know where these ideas are coming from?
Well, and I think the $1,000,000 question was, what does that even mean? Is it even the word we want to use? I think at one point we even talked about let's not even use that word because it's confusing. It's confusing things.
Yeah, because as I said, a lot of people use self judgment, or have self judgment, I should say. They don't necessarily use the word perfection. They use the words maybe, I need to please people. I'm a people pleaser. Or they say, I need to be good enough. So if I can share my personal story,
Of course.
which I think I told you, I am Jewish, but I grew up in a country that really didn't like Jews at all. And my father, when I was a child, told me always, he would repeat it, you have to be 3 times as good as everybody else just to be considered good enough. And I was in a trance because I was a child, and I just accepted that. And so when I grew up, I knew, without consciously really acknowledging it or understanding it or thinking about it, because it became subconscious. I always knew I had to be better than everybody else. And so people around me, so that kind of turned into a journey towards perfectionism, right? And so people around me perceived me as just pushing everybody to the limit, or pushing, even, I mean, I pushed myself as much as everybody else, but saw me as just almost being unreasonably, I don't want to say pushy, not in that way, but sort of
Driven?
driven. Yeah, unreasonably driven. Thank you. Because their interpretation probably was that because I just want to be seen as the best. But in my mind, that was never the case. I was just trying to be good enough for everybody. I wanted to be considered good enough by everybody else. I wanted to be considered acceptable by everybody else. It's just the suggestion that was implanted in my subconscious mind that in order for me to be good enough, and in order for me to be on par with everybody else, I had to go 3 times as far. So sometimes people experience this kind of, it's a difference in perceptions, a difference in interpretation of reality. Because what I was doing is not what people were perceiving, or my motivation was not what people were
Right.
perceiving.
Right. Right. As you were talking, and I've spent time thinking about this outside of today as well, I was thinking about growing up as a dancer. And so dance has served me well. It's been my passion. I continue to dance. There's so many things I love about it. But I do think at an early age, there was this message of striving for some aesthetic, striving to be as, I don't want to say perfect, but striving to be as proficient and have the right look and the right technique and the right body, and you're staring at yourself in the mirror for many hours a day. It's not healthy or normal. And I do think some sports and some practices or passions or hobbies, like there is that ideal, if you will. And I think even though dance served me well in a lot of ways, I think it programmed me in such a way that I was looking at myself very negatively, and like it was going to take a lot to get to where I needed to be, type of thing.
Right. And I mean, this programming and these expectations definitely exist in all the sports. mean, if you look at gymnastics and how, what's been done to the young girls that are becoming younger and younger as they enter the sport. And I think we have a tendency as a society, at least as an American society, to put entertainment, to put that performance above the concerns and cares of the individuals who are performing, right? So the things that, for example, in football, the things that are done to the young men, the football players, the injuries that they're experiencing, the fans are not, I mean, we are concerned, but we're not concerned enough to stop it, right? So we are concerned about athletes that may be injured, but we're not concerned about to stop that entertainment, the value that we get out of it. And so there is then the pressure to live up to that, to be acceptable within the industry, to do well within the industry, because the expectations get higher and higher as time goes by. People just perform better and better. And so, yeah, sometimes it's hard to even get out of that. I mean, you have to probably literally quit what you're doing to free yourself of those expectations. But most people can, they're not in such strict, I guess, limitations, or they have the freedom to sort of free themselves.
Well, I want to shift to this idea of what do we do? How do we get to a place where we feel more at peace and less pressure to be a certain way or a certain aesthetic or a certain ability or performance? And I think about the dance example, and I think you hit the nail on the head with I feel conflicted, because there's this part of me that says dance is an art. And in art, anything goes. The abstract, the bizarre, the unique, art is art. Art is art for art's sake. And so for me, I think of traditional art and there is no standard, but I think about ballet as an example and it's like, oh no, there's a standard.
Right, right.
And so I think I feel this conflict of express and create, and it's all good, it's all art, it's all amazing, it's all expression. And then this other piece of me that's like, but it's also supposed to look like that and not like that, you know.
Well, it's a really good sort of belief or thought to unpack as well, because ballet is a perfect example. Yes, there are very specific standards, right? But what we don't think about is that even those standards are still built by people and they can actually change. So, for example, one standard or one sort of thing was that I think the ballet, the shoes, whatever they're
Oh,
called.
point shoes?
Yeah, point shoes. That they have always been made in a certain color, and they were made to fit white people's skin tone. And so, I mean, it's a very practical issue, right? But it is, in a way, it's a standard, right? All shoes were in that sort of skin tone, matched that skin tone. And when we had brown skinned and black skinned ballerinas or dancers joining or coming into the dance in larger numbers, it became clear that those shoes don't work for them.
Right.
So there had to be a point of awareness, right? It's not about judgment. Oh, you were all racist before. It doesn't have to be that. It's about, oh, we created this as a standard because that's kind of what we were experiencing before. That's how it was structured before, even though it was racist, but that's the reality before, right? So you start with an awareness that any standard that you live within or you adhere to is not a God-given standard. Right? It's not the ultimate truth of the universe. It's just what people created that worked for them at that time. And that's why all the work that I do and all the work, you said, what are the steps to changing it? Awareness is the first step. It's creating that awareness that everything I believe may not actually be the ultimate God given truth, right? Everything I believe might be just what people have believed before me, and they taught me that, and I accepted it as the truth. But what if it's not? Then where is it coming from? And is it possible to change it? And is there something else that I can choose to believe or choose to work with, right? So if you were to ask me, how do we change it? The first step is to just stop and reflect. Where do your beliefs come from? Did you create them or did you absorb them? Did you just accept that this is how the world turns and this is how things are? And that all ballet shoes in real ballet have to be this tone, this color? Or is that just because we only had white dancers before? And then it becomes, oh, that's a different thing we're dealing with. And we can actually change it. So when we think about standards, if we don't allow for the possibility that those standards are just our human creation and it was created because it made sense to us at that point, then we can allow for the possibility that they can be shifted, they can be changed. We can create different standards.
Yeah, and I think the message I get and what's inspiring to me is that it puts you back in the driver's seat of life, that you can work on this, you can have an awareness of it. You can say this is no longer this framework or this way of thinking or believing is no longer working for me. Maybe it never worked for me. I want to have a different experience. And I know in my line of work, and I'm sure you feel the same way, you kind of have to remind folks it takes time.
Absolutely.
It's a process.
Yeah.
I think in our culture, we all want a quick fix. Once I decide I want a different outcome or a different experience or a different way of being in my body or in my mind, I want it now. But it does take not only awareness, but time and processing and being open to the feelings that you're having. And
Yeah, and especially with hypnosis, a lot of people come in and they want, as I said at the beginning, they want me to just sort of knock them out, rebuild them, and when they wake up, they'll be version 2.0 of
yeah,
themselves. And that's not how hypnotherapy works. That's not how any therapy works. Hypnotherapy works with rewiring neural pathways so that you begin to think differently or believe differently. Now, it's not that you think differently like somebody forced you to. It's
right.
actually, as you said, it's empowering. So that instead of somebody else sort of operating you on a subconscious level, because your operating system is playing out the instructions that were placed there by somebody else, right? You absorbed somebody else's beliefs, somebody else's standards. So you have someone else's instruction manual within you. And so by becoming aware of it and then choosing how you want to play out your life and what standards you want to adhere to and how you want to experience yourself, then you're writing your own operational manual. And that's empowering, and that's what I always strive for. I mean, there are other steps to it, of course, and awareness is the first one, but then it's deciding what is the level of perfection that you want, or what is right for you. What do you really want to create? What do you really want to experience? And then finding that level of alignment, that level of balance, where something feels right, but it's not too perfect, which is sort of the negative of right.
When you and I were together for a workshop over the weekend, this idea of the operating system came up. And for me, that just really works as a metaphor or an example, kind of this idea that everything needs an update from time to time, and you can install one. And not installed because it was coerced or forced or manipulated on you, but installed because you said, from a self help perspective, I want to address this and I want to talk about it and I want to figure out what would serve me better and be more helpful to me on a daily basis in walking on this planet. And so I'm glad you brought that up because I thought, ooh, the operating system example of, you might be operating on something that's a little outdated, that's no longer working for you, that a variety of reasons why it's that way. But in this moment, we can learn new tools and skills and perspective shifts and perceptions and update the operating system that stuff is evidence-based, right? You can learn to be more optimistic. You
Of
can
course.
you can learn to see the good in your day as opposed to the negative that we're wired for. So,
Well, the evidence for me is in the experience of the clients.
mhm.
So if they feel that they are achieving the outcomes that they wanted to achieve, then that's evidence. And then ultimately, hypnosis is not like a religion. You don't have to believe it or not believe it. You use it, you try it, you work with it. If you create the outcome that you want, then
That's a
there's
win.
evidence.
That's a win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I know we're about out of time. Any other closing thoughts that you have, or maybe you want to tell people where you hang out, where they can find you, where they can listen to you?
Yeah. So I hang out in Reynoldsburg, which is in Columbus, Ohio. And people can find me on my website, which is awakenedhypnosis.com. Interestingly enough, I'm in the process of finalizing, I'm updating my website. The new version is already live, but I'm dealing with some last minute things that I'm trying to get just right. And so this path, which I'm also walking on, deciding, am I tipping off balance in sort of my search for perfection so that there is perfect consistency throughout every page and everything looks, ideal? Or do I kind of just let go and allow for little things to be there? Because people ultimately are not going to walk through my website looking for inconsistencies. It's only, in my mind.
Right.
So I am right now going through this process of kind of keeping myself in balance and trying not to overdo it. But the website is almost done. I also have a YouTube channel, Natalie Candela, Hypnotherapist. And some of my regression sessions are posted there, as well as some of the educational videos that I have done. So people can go and listen to some of the client stories, which are quite interesting.
Yes. People are fascinating. I love people. That's why I
Yeah.
do what I do. And, oftentimes on this podcast, we're looking at ways that we can layer more health and happiness directly into the workday. I think today we're just talking about something that's relatable. And I've also been on a pretty massive self-help journey most of my life. And so I'm also just, using some of that to inform my work and the topics that I write or speak about. So thank you for being here today.
Of
And
course, it's a pleasure. Thanks for
yeah,
having me.
I think it's good to shine a light on new topics, new modalities, therapies, that type of thing. It may really be a game changer for someone. So thank you for
Yeah,
being here.
of course.